Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Unleashing the Power of Portal Pages to Drive User Engagement. I'm Mike Smitherman, Head of Sales and Marketing over here at Metric Insights. And I've got Marius with me, our founder and CEO. Hi, Marius.
Hello, everyone.
So the usual sort of housekeeping things, obviously lines are muted as we have a pretty big group on here today. We are obviously recording this on the BrightTalk platform, so we'll send out a link to the webinar afterwards. There is a Q&A section in the interface that you should see, so feel free to add questions as we go through this. And we may answer them as we go, or we may look at those at the end. We'll leave plenty of time. But with that, let's get into the content. So we're going to spend some time talking through some slides with Marius to tee it up. This is going to be a little bit more of a sort of product-focused webinar. So we are going to get into the tool a little bit and show some examples. So hopefully it'll give you some ideas of what you can be doing. So with that, let's hand over to Marius and get going.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to start by talking about the number one problem, the most endemic and pervasive problem in BI environments, which is poor engagement. Now, when you measure engagement, there's really two ways you can look at it. You can look at of the content that I've created, how much of that is actually getting actively used. And then you can say also, well, the folks that are consuming content using our BI tools, I've licensed X number, how many are actually consuming that content, right? So typically, if you look at the content consumption itself, less than 30% of the content that you have out there, those BI reports that you've published out to your server, are getting actively used by users. Even if you define active usage as something like a single access in 6 months, right? Even along that metric, we typically see less than 30%. In fact, just this past week, we did a content audit for one of our customers, a large customer, over 1,000 users, thousands of pieces of content, and that number was significantly below 10%. So, and this is not because, the analysts don't know what they're doing or people are creating bad content. It's really just because over time in a mature environment, all of the BI reports that are created, they have a life cycle. Something that I build today that's incredibly useful. Well, it might not be that useful 6 months or 9 months or a year and a half from now, as the business has changed, as the needs of my users have changed. And somebody might take that content and modify it a little bit, but they might leave what I created there originally. And now over time, that process just builds a lot of clutter, and it generates this environment where majority of things that are out there are not actually actively consumed. And there's no process to necessarily clean that up and keep it fresh, to make sure that the content that's out there, is pulled off the shelf when the sell-by date has expired, if you like. Right? So that's the problem there. And that leads to that low license usage where, again, typically, I can't think of a single time we've done an audit for a customer where we've looked at, what's their license utilization, where they have had more than 50% of their users actively engage with their BI tool over a 3 to 6 month period, looking at that period of time. So this is a pervasive problem, and it's something that if you were to ask your users and say, well, why is it? What is it that you're not using the content? Why are you not using your Tableau or Power BI or whatever your MicroStrategy or whatever you might have in place? The kinds of things you're going to hear if you survey them are things like, well, geez, I just don't know where to find useful information. I look, and a lot of times the things I'm looking at are just not that useful. Or they'll tell you that the information I need, it's just buried across so many different dashboards that it just takes me too long. By the time I figure out what I need to find and where it is, too much time. Or from the dashboards themselves, it just takes me too much time to get the insights out. There's so many different filters, so many different ways to slice the data. And I've got to know which particular filter combination and slice and I need to look at in order to get value, and that just takes a long time and it's hard. Or, geez, I look at this dashboard and I just don't really understand what the data is telling me. What does this really mean? The definitions aren't clear around this particular content, so that I don't really know what the meaning is of this content. Or you might hear that, even worse, that there's different numbers and they're coming from different places, and I don't know which of these numbers I should trust. And this problem, it's not just about clutter, right? It's because it's about the fact that fundamentally, in large enterprises today, users are consuming their content from many different places. They might have multiple BI tools that they're working with. In addition to that, they might be using SharePoint or file system shares. They're looking at Excel and PDFs. And all of that is telling them different information, and understanding how to navigate that chaos and make sense of it is a hugely daunting task. So in the end, for really, I would maintain for more than half of your users, in the end, when they look at BI, the juice is just simply not worth a squeeze. What I mean by that is, if you think about how much time it takes, say a new user for your analytics platform, to go and get value out of the analytics, right? So imagine this is like a chart, and you've got your time across the x-axis, and they're going in there and they're applying effort. They're going in, they're looking at dashboard, they're changing filter values, they're switching, they're looking at different places to try to gain some insight. Well, that process requires a lot of initial upfront effort. I've got to figure out which content I'm going to look at, I'm changing filter values, I'm analyzing, I'm thinking about it. And only after I've expended a certain amount of effort will I start getting reward, right? Will I start getting insights? And that time that's required, in reality, for most business users, is at most 1 to 2 minutes. So, if you look at the user and you put them on truth serum and you say, how much time are you really going to give me when you go into my BI environment and you're going to look before you give up, before you move on and do something else, right? In reality, it's just a couple of minutes that they're willing to spend on looking through analytics. If you've given them some insight in that period of time, then they might keep on looking because you've hooked them. But if you haven't, if in that time they haven't found something useful, they're not going to continue. They're going to go away. And as Will Rogers famously said, you get one chance to make a first impression. That's it. You only get one shot. So if that new user comes into your BI environment and they don't generate value out of it, the likelihood of them coming back again is fairly small. And that's why there's such a small percentage of users that are continuously engaged with analytics in your environment. So what do we do about that? How do we generate solutions that actually not only look good, but generate sustained user engagement? Basically draw users to the solution and keep them attached to it, keep them engaged, because they're generating continuous value. Well, in this presentation, I'm going to show you, Mike will actually show you, but I'll speak about how portal pages and metric insights are one very, very effective tool to make this happen, in that they're an overlay around your existing BI environment that allow you to really make content much more compelling and take user value. And they do that in a number of different ways. First of all, you need to create order from chaos. So you take all that content that you have in your portal and you bubble up those things that users need and then use on a regular basis, and present it in a very clean, compelling, organized fashion. The second part of effective design of a portal page is that it must create a compelling user journey with content that can be trusted. So it can't just be well-organized content that's not relevant to what the user needs to do. It has to be the content that is structured and organized in such a way that what they would need to do every day is aided by that content, and that the content can be trusted, it's cohesive, and it allows them to go through the journey from, geez, I have a question, to, oh, this is the answer to my question. This is what I need to look at today, because this is what's causing a problem in the business that needs my attention. And it needs to take them through that journey quickly. So again, doesn't matter if 5 minutes into their journey you would have gotten them value, if they're going to quit on you 2 minutes in. Essentially, that journey was a failure for them. So the design of the portal page must be such that they can get to value quickly. And then finally, you have to weave meaning or literacy into the experience. So it's very important to think about how is the consumption journey designed such that I as a user come in and I understand what I'm looking at. I understand, okay, what is this sales number? What does it represent? Is it gross sales? Is it net of channel activity or not? What am I looking at? And how do these different numbers and different dashboards, how do they tie together? Are they measuring the same thing or are they measuring something different? So having data literacy baked into the journey is really important from an effectiveness perspective. So as we jump into the demo, I want you to notice that there are a few techniques that are being used in these portal pages to make this happen. First of all, we've created a personalized journey. So each user is coming in based on their persona. They have a journey where their content is relevant. They're not bombarded with content that is not relevant. They're seeing what they need for their journey. Second, we're going to use KPIs to provide this top-down view and focus user attention. So we're going to use metrics so that you don't force your users to go into a dashboard and have to flip through numerous filter values to figure out the particular slice of filter values that might have something interesting for them. Instead, you bubble up these KPIs, bring them up, and then show them to the user so that they know exactly where they need to go for attention. So this is a way to focus and ensure that every user only spends the time that they need and gets them to value very quickly. And then when the user does switch from this more predefined journey into perhaps more of a discovery process where they're looking for content, we'll show you how we enable that content discovery in a way that is structured, that is streamlined, where they can look in one place and find all their content, and they can understand that content in context of what they need to make sense from a data literacy perspective. Right, so that the key metadata when they're looking at data that tells them about the sensitivity around the data, around the certification status of data, around what is this data measuring, how are terms defined, that all of that is wrapped around the visualization so that when they're consuming it, they have it right at their fingertips and they understand what they're looking at. So with that, I will switch to Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So let me just stop sharing the slides here, and you can stay in the camera here, Marius, and jump in with us here as we go through this. But let me just share my other screen here. Second. Looking good there. Okay, so I know there's a bunch of people who join us on multiple webinars, so I'm sure a lot of you have already seen some of the Metric Insights platform. But I just want to sort of level set a little bit before we jump into the areas that Marius was talking about. So if you know of us, you know sort of the core of what we do is being able to provide this sort of aggregated portal for users that connects to all the sources of BI in your organization and effectively allows you to create this sort of centralized catalog for users so that they're not getting lost in the underlying tools and technologies. And that's what you're looking at here. This is the Metric Insights catalog. Each of these tiles is a piece of content that's being published into the catalog, typically in sort of a governed way where it's been tested and certified. So as a user coming into this view, I know that this is the content that I have access to. This is the content I can trust if I go and look at it, and that it's had some level of checks and balances in it. But even with a catalog like this, even if we've gone through the effort of creating a catalog like this, as Marius said, most users spend maybe a couple of minutes at the beginning of their day thinking about data and metrics. And taking the effort to come in and figure out which reports and dashboards I should be looking at is typically too much effort, and they don't do it. So what we want to do is basically use a piece of functionality within Metric Insights, this concept of what we call portal pages, which will become clearer, to effectively simplify that journey and capture their attention within a couple of minutes so that they can get the information they need. And so we're going to take you through this. We're going to sort of layer on pieces of the journey as we go, and show you, just one example of sort of what a persona-based experience might be like. So the first thing we're going to touch on is this concept of sort of landing pages, and think of these as sort of the storefront for a particular persona. So, if I want to target, say, Marius, you're an exec in the organization, maybe you're particularly focused on sort of sales and marketing, but you have insight into the whole organization. We want to create you a storefront that sort of leads you in and entices you in to look at the content that's relevant to you. And like a storefront, one size doesn't fit all. So, if I had a store and I was designing the storefront and I was selling groceries, I wouldn't put a bunch of clothes and shoes in the storefront, right? I want to entice you in with what's relevant. So in this case, we're designing a landing page here. It's personalized to the sort of exec persona with a bent towards sales and marketing. And within that catalog of content, where there's actually hundreds of reports in there that you might have access to, there's really only a small subset of that content that you're looking at on a regular basis. And so on this landing page, we're pulling in some links to curated content in the sales and marketing area of the catalog that, again, has been governed and tested. You've also gone in there in the past and curated some favorites. So you've starred or dragged some tiles into your favorites folder. So we want to make sure you've got quick access to that. And we've included some additional material over here that might be interesting and help you on your journey. And so whilst this is kind of a small thing, it feels like not a huge step here, immediately we've gone from, if I just click back to the catalog, quite an intimidating view of the world where, sure, there's a lot of useful information in here, but taken you, into something that is more welcoming and more specific to you. And so the point we're trying to get across here is, again, design these sort of welcome pages, these storefronts with the persona in mind, and make sure you're keeping them just targeted to the specific things that you might be interested in.
Yeah, and I mean, think about the initial experience of a user coming into something like this, right? It's just so much. You're guided on the right hand side. I've got videos, knowledge base, FAQs. I can reach out, and it just does not feel intimidating at all. So I think this is exactly the approach for somebody who is going to be maybe a little overwhelmed by something like the catalog.
Exactly, and I think for these sort of things, like all BI, design is important as well. So obviously this is kind of very Metric Insights branded with colors and logos here, but obviously within the platform you can brand this to your organization or even specific departments in your organization. Again, make it familiar, make it welcoming, make it somewhere that they want to come. So landing pages is sort of the first piece of this, and again, having that initial good experience for the user that starts to entice them into the content. Second thing we're going to look at is okay, for this content that we've shared with this user, how can we browse through this in a much more efficient way? So typically today, without a portal, you may be bookmarking different reports and dashboards. They may be in different tools. You may be having to log them in to different tools and technologies each time you want to look at them. Even with a portal, if we just go back to our catalog, I probably have to come and click into tiles. If I want to look at our sales dashboard, I maybe come in here and okay, it's logged me into Tableau now, so I don't have to worry about where that is in Tableau. But then I have to come out and maybe I'm looking at my ClickSense content as well. So there's a lot of back and forth that has to go on, and I have to know which folders and categories I'm interested in focusing on. So our welcome page has brought us in. I know I want to go and browse maybe sales reports or dashboards today. Well, I should be able to go into that common content, and whether it's content that I've curated myself in my favorites folder or whether it's those governed folders, I should have a quick way of being able to browse through this content without having to worry about the complexities of where it is in the underlying technology. I can switch between Click and Tableau. I can go and look at our finance figures in Power BI because that's what the finance department is using. And very quickly browse through different pieces of content to look at it in a much more efficient way, and not have this back and forth, and not be distracted by the clutter of what's available to you within the catalog as a whole. So a welcoming experience, be able to come in and browse quickly through the content that I look at every day, and again, not worry about the technology, but still, I know you, Marius, you come in the morning, first thing you do is you jump into meetings. And, even though data is interesting to you, you're not thinking about it, even though there's probably some things going on that could be interesting to you. And so, every user gets distracted. And so even with that, we want to guide the user better. And for people who are familiar with our platform, we want to do that through the concept of metrics and KPIs. So I know, Marius, you're very sort of metrics driven. And whilst dashboards and details are interesting to you, we really just want to highlight what's changing in those dashboards to help you help guide you into the detailed analysis. And so within the Metric Insights platform, we have this concept of being able to bubble up key performance indicators from all your key content. So that could be metrics coming from, say, that Tableau dashboard we were looking at. It could be metrics coming from any of your dashboards or underlying data sources. And we want to identify a set of key performance indicators that are relevant to you. And in doing that as well, what the platform does is it basically analyzes how those metrics are changing over time so that we can start to, again, target you in a particular area. So in this case, back on our welcome screen here, you'll see this tile where we're actually highlighting to you that out of the metrics that you're interested in, actually there's some that are underperforming. So hopefully this is going to entice you when you glance at this in the morning after you've opened your browser to click on this and see what's going on. And what we've done here is essentially create another portal page within the platform that is taking those metrics being sourced from our different BI assets and organizing them in a way that is much more interesting to you. And there's a lot going on this page that I'll touch on to sort of take you through this experience. But at the high level, you've got your key metrics down the bottom here in each of the functional areas which you're keeping an eye on. You talked a lot about sort of trust in the slides, and a lack of trust or within the user base is probably, I think, one of the biggest barriers to continued engagement with content. You sort of mentioned the first impression type thing, and I don't think users don't lose trust because there's problems with the data. I think users lose trust because you don't tell them there's problems with the data. BI is never going to be 100% perfect 100% of the time. Therefore, the key to maintaining trust is communication. So one of the concepts that we have within Metric Insights is this concept of announcements, which you're seeing at the top here, which can either be at the portal level, like we're doing here, or on individual pieces of content. And they can either be manually added into the system, or they can be automatically generated based on events happening within the data as you're loading content into your dashboards and portal. So in this scenario, we may be experiencing issues with our data loads into the majority of our dashboards this morning. We had network issues, everything's delayed. The last thing I want is you coming in here, seeing this data, panicking because there's a bunch of red metrics on the screen, and drilling into those and then finding out, an hour later that actually the data's just not been updated today.
Right, because I'm panicked. I'll be screaming at somebody and we're sending a nasty email or something like that. The BI people are going to be the ones facing that. So
yeah,
that's right.
So I can save you a lot of time just by making these announcements through the portal. In this case, you'd probably come in, see I've got 5 or 6 metrics here that aren't performing. See the announcement and probably shut your browser and go into your meetings because it's not worth looking at this point.
Right.
So communication is key to again maintaining that trust. If there are problems, be upfront about it and let people know.
That's right, and you've kept me from wasting my time. And so going back to that point from the beginning, you've kept that. I didn't get that juice is not worth the squeeze experience because I didn't do a bunch of digging only to discover that actually I'm looking at yesterday's data, right?
Exactly.
I know not to look at it. I think it's very important.
So the other way I want to save you time, so let's assume we've solved this issue at the top for a minute and our dashboards are updated, is I think when we design dashboards and reports, we put a lot of effort into rightly so, trying to answer every question. And by that, I mean, I'm not going to create individual dashboards for each country and each channel and each product. I'm going to introduce filters into my dashboards and provide a very rich experience where you can slice and dice the data and navigate around and look for things in the data that might be interesting. But the challenge with that is it takes time. And the other challenge is most people are not interested in everything. There's particular, in this case, maybe regions or channels or products that you are responsible for. And that's where you want to pay attention. And so having this concept within these experiences and these journeys where we pre-filter content to your world is important as well. And we can use this concept of what we call a user map within the Metric Insights platform, but essentially think of it as a way of pre-filtering the content to your world. So when you come in, if you're responsible for a region, a channel, or a product category, that's the data that you're looking at straight away. So I'm not wasting your time if the data is not up to date. I'm not wasting your time in trying to figure out the filter combinations that you're interested in. And obviously you can come in and if there's other areas you do look at, change those and see what the values are. But 9 times out of 10, you're looking at the same thing. Yeah. So we see some red here, right? So I mentioned that we are automatically sort of looking for anomalies and changes within the data. Well, we can use that to color code and traffic light these metrics. So again, do you want to look at every metric every day? Probably not. You want to look at the ones that seem to indicate there could be issues or significant changes. And if you see an issue, that's probably the point where you're going to dive into the underlying details behind it. But if we remember up front, each of these metrics is probably being sourced from a different technology, even certainly a different dashboard. And so we need to make it seamless that if I see a problem with sales in Australia, for one of our product categories, and I drill into that we're taking you to the specific dashboard where those details exist. In this case, it exists in Tableau. And that we're pre-filtering that content to what you were looking at. So the last thing I want to do is spend the time filtering down to the metrics that I'm interested in and then have to refilter every dashboard I go into. We want to pass those filters in and make sure that you're focused again on the region and the product category and the channel where that existed.
And that is so huge. It might seem like a small thing, but just passing those filter values, especially if in this kind of scenario where I've got multiple dashboards that I need to look at. So if I've identified, it's Australia and corporate sales that I really need to look at, and then I want to go look at another dashboard. The fact that you pass those to every dashboard automatically, it just can save a lot of time and perceived frustration around doing this. So I think that's really important.
And yeah, exactly. And obviously, again, to labor the point, these metrics, costs might be coming from a dashboard and click this time, right? I as a user shouldn't have to worry about that. It should, again, in this case, pass the filter values that I had navigated to, take me into the underlying technology. It's embedded within the portal page and viewer so that I'm not getting lost in the underlying tool. And again, it's a seamless experience, even though there's a lot going on in the background from these different technologies. It's signing me into them. I'm not having to worry about logins or anything like that. So, what have we achieved here as we've gone through this? Well, so we've layered on these different sort of legs of the journey, if you like, and again, just one example, sort of this exec view. So we've created your landing page that is very curated to your persona, so gets you to the content in the catalog that's relevant to you quickly. Leads you into, entices you into the content that's most relevant to you, and piques your interest by using metrics that are perhaps changing significantly that you wouldn't know about otherwise. It's telling you if there's issues with the data so that you don't waste your time. And it's also, filtering it down to your world so that you're not wasting time having to slice and dice through a lot of content to find out what's going on. So it's a much more efficient experience.
Yeah, and if you look at that experience from the beginning, you've got access to this very large number of metrics, which underneath them each could have a different dashboard.
Yep.
But it's not overwhelming, right? I'm coming into something that feels simple, and I've got a high level number that, and then you sort of gradually peeling back the onion and showing more and more detail, which is the way that human beings want to consume information. They don't want to be, don't throw every number at me, but just walk me through a guided path where I can then know what numbers to look at and understand them.
And you're right, there could be 16 dashboards behind these numbers.
Yeah.
I guarantee you wouldn't go in and browse 16 dashboards every morning to see what's going on.
But I might look at those handful, or one of those handful that piques my interest and says, oh, geez, I got to look at that number.
So hopefully that's given you an idea of, and again, these portal pages in the product are very sort of dynamic and customizable, right? So this is really meant as sort of an example journey that you might give your users, and again, based on sort of the level that they work with data and the level that they work with analytics, the journey is going to be different, right? And so you need to be thinking about that as you define requirements around these things. The other piece that Marius spoke about that we'll touch on for sort of the last 10 minutes, and then we'll answer a few questions if there are any, is this concept of sort of searching beyond this into that whole catalog of content that we looked at in the beginning. Again, you've got access to many different categories, probably hundreds of reports, if not thousands within here. And so we want to enable this search experience within your journey, so that if you do have questions beyond the content that you look at every day, you can find content that's relevant to you. And so what does that mean? It means being able to come in and search across the body of content that you have access to, maybe to find what other sales reports or marketing reports are out there. And so, what we're doing from a search perspective is we do things like recommend common search terms, recommend common content that gets consumed based around those search terms. But if I run a search, we're searching across all the different tools, all the different assets that you as a user have access to, or that has been tagged as discoverable in terms of, we want you to find content that's out there, even if maybe today you don't have access to it, that you might want to request access to. And we're searching through all that metadata that we're storing about each of these reports that have come back in the search results. And that's everything from sort of names, descriptions, to who certified the content, to how it's categorized. Does it contain sensitive information? Is it internal or public facing? Who owns this content? Where does it come from? What's the engagement with it? All this information to bring back sort of a ranked set of results that hopefully are going to be relevant to you based on what you're searching for. And obviously I can filter out by those different areas on the left-hand side. So, I'm not interested in stuff that contains PII data, for example. I only want to see things that have been through a certification process. We track engagement with the content, who's using it. So I'm not interested in the junk that's out there around this, around sales. I just want the stuff that everyone's using and looking at every day. And so by running a search, filtering it down, looking at the highly engaging content, I can see what else is out there that might answer my questions.
Yeah, and I think, if you think about for all of us in our everyday life, right? I don't think there's a day I go by without using Google a few times to search for information in my day-to-day life. But yet somehow we're expecting our users in BI to interact with the vast amounts of content that are out there without giving them a search capability that spans all that content, which is just, it's ridiculous. No wonder no one's using business intelligence. So I think that, just clear that this kind of capability is critical.
Mm-hmm. And again, I want, so you spoke about data literacy, Marius, and what does that really mean? It's around having sort of the context around the analytics. So I think that's an important piece of the journey, in that if I'm looking at a particular dashboard, and I have questions around what it is I'm actually looking at, I should be able to easily understand that. So, whether that's because, what does sales really mean within this dashboard, right? How is it defined? Who owns those definitions? Where else is that metric being used? So that I've got, a clear understanding of what it is I'm looking at. Does sales contain everything, online, store, channel, or is it just, part of that equation? So having the context in terms of what the data is, being able to get access to documentation around how to use this particular dashboard helps me in my journey. Even things like sort of the lineage of where this is coming from in the underlying tools, or, is this the same dashboard that I'm receiving in emails that I subscribe to within the platform? Understanding the context and the categorization behind this, any commentary that's been added, gives me, again, the context I need when I'm looking at these assets. So we'll go back to the slides for a summary, but hopefully you've started to get the concept of how we can pull people through a journey. They have a couple of minutes each day to think about data. We can put something front and center that entices them maybe to either answer questions in a couple of minutes, or entices them enough to spend the time to figure out what's going on, because it's going to help them in their job that they're doing that day.
Yeah, and I think what you saw Mike, and what you saw Mike show you, one thing to think about is there are two parts to that experience the user has. There's the component where it is more of a journey, like the things that you want to do every day, and there you want to create that curated portal page experience. But you also want to be thinking about the discovery process. So there's something that's not in my folders or not my favorites. I want to look for it. How have you really used tagging and metadata and business glossary and usage information, how that can all work together to guide people to the right content when they're looking for something. And so if you can solve both parts of that experience, then you create a very sticky environment. And kind of just as a wrap up, right? The idea is that what you need to do in any, giving you just an example portal page, right? But and there's many different combinations and variables of how you can pull these things together, but they all have these themes in common, is that they always create order from chaos. So you're not exposing them to the jungle that's out there in your BI environment, where there's all kinds of obsolete reports or duplicative reports or things that are saying different things. You're bringing just the things that are good and certified into a coherent experience where it's orderly, and it's more like it is the experience of going through a museum, right? Not going through a garage, right? It's that sort of experience. And then you've got you create a compelling user journey. So it's not just let's throw a portal page together that pulls information from multiple places in one location. It's a thoughtful process where you're saying, well, what is it that this user really needs to do their job? What do they look at every day? What are they searching for when they do use analytics? And how do we design an experience that just gets them that information in a way that's very compelling, inviting, and so forth, and it generates trust. And then get them to the value quickly, right? So using those things that Mike showed you, the pre-filters. So if I'm in charge of Canada, well, when I go into that metrics page, I should see Canada as my default drop-down. If Mike's in charge of Australia, he should see Australia. You don't make me change a filter if you can use some intelligence to preset filters based on a map. And that achieves that combination of personalization, while at the same time making the experience something that can be applied in enterprise scale to a large number of people, just by virtue of the fact that you use the map to create a personalized experience for each person. So that's really important. And then the things that Mike showed you, the ability to just make literacy part of the experience, whether that's about knowing whether the data is good or not, whether that's about understanding what the definition is of a particular business term or glossary term, or whether that's about being able to use all these various pieces of metadata when I'm searching for content. All of that coming together to create a compelling engagement.
Good. Well, hopefully there's been some interesting things here. Let's look at any Q&A that might have come in. Let me just stop sharing here. Let's go back on. Okay, just bear with us 1 minute whilst we scan questions. Okay, so there's one here about sort of a tactical one about filtering content. So on that metrics view we were looking at, Marius, if a row comes from different BI tools like they were, how do you ensure all metrics can be filtered using the same 3 drop downs and dimensions that are common across platforms?
Yeah, so that's very astute observation. Clearly, if you're going to be clicking through to dashboards, and there's some standardization needs to be done vis-a-vis filter value names. That's the easiest way to do that. If that's not possible, you can build the page with some mappings. So for example, you can know the country is called region in one and not in the other.
Do some aliasing.
Aliasing. The values have to be somewhat consistent. So there, if you got complete chaos, then that common filter won't work. It is the case though in some scenarios where you might not all the dashboards you click through necessarily will have all the filters, and so but obviously, if you're showing a high-level number, it's helpful if they do. So there's some design that's helpful. If they don't, then you filter to the extent that you can, and then they can take the journey the rest of the way within the dashboard to do the analysis. So the more control you have over that overall ecosystem and the ability to make it coherent, the tighter that journey can be created.
Yeah, I think the common thing is, the filter names are typically not the same. So it's important that we support that sort of aliasing of filter names. Yeah, the values tend to you want some consistency around that so that you're sure of what you're looking at. Let's look at some other questions. The question here about, couldn't I create this sort of experience in my BI tool directly? Have you got some thoughts on that, maybe?
Yeah. So obviously with BI tools these days you can almost do almost anything. So with enough time and resources, you could take a Power BI or Tableau and create something that looks like a landing page experience. But you really will not have done what we just shown you. And the reason for that is that what you saw in Mike's example is that we used the building blocks of the individual components, different data sources, different dashboards, etc., that you've registered with the metric insights and created that experience. And that experience can be customized by user. It can be easily modified. If you build something in a BI tool to do it, it's very fixed. Right. And if you want to make any changes, it's really difficult to do that. It's unlikely you'd be able to effectively do it across all the different data sources that you're looking at. So it would be kind of using the wrong tool for the job to make it happen.
Yeah, I think you want to leverage the work you've done already, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not talking really about building another dashboard here, although I guess that metrics page in theory you could define as a dashboard, right? But the point is it's being sourced from the content that you already have in place, and it's more a sort of organizational paradigm, right? How do we present that content in an effective way? And to your point, most of these pages that we create, it's a combination of pre-curating some stuff, but also like your favorites, right? You might be curating that. So the content that's actually being delivered through that page could be different for every user, even though it's effectively the same page. And that's a very difficult thing to sort of code into a BI tool. And then you might be using multiple BI tools behind the scenes, and that becomes challenging. Let's look at what else we've got here. You talk a bit about, so there's a question about sort of measuring success with these efforts and the impact of these efforts. I guess in general, sort of you spoke about engagement and that being a key metric. How do you know when things are working?
Yeah, so I think that the fundamental way is you measure it, and one of the things that we do in Metric Insights is we have I know we showed another webinars that we do. We have a engagement tracking where we look at how often people use the content, and so that's the sort of the number one rule. And then there's otherwise you can also do surveying and do customer satisfaction and have an assessment in that respect as well. So you can do both a qualitative and a quantitative measure associated with engagement.
Yeah, I think engagement is probably the key thing, right? And it's repetitive engagement as well, right? So you've got to be tracking this stuff over time. It's no good that you've got 600 views for a particular dashboard that they all happened on the day that you published it and shared it with everyone if no one comes back again, right? So I think you made the point up front that there's a life cycle to every asset that you create, and so keeping on top of that. But over time, you should see an increase in engagement with the content that you're creating.
Yeah.
There's a question here about this just popped up around licensing for. Does a user require a parallel license for Power BI in order to use Metric Insights? So basically, yes. If you want to interact with the content itself, i.e., drill into a particular dashboard and interact with that dashboard, we're doing a single sign-on at that point and passing the credentials of that user into the underlying tool. We're effectively embedding that within the portal. So whether I'm accessing Power BI or Tableau, I need a license on that tool to be able to interact with it. When we bubble up the metric experience, if I'm just looking at metrics coming from those tools, no, I don't need a license. So on that page we were looking at, I don't need a license to see those metrics. I can slice and dice those metrics as we were seeing. But if I want to drill into the underlying dashboard that they came from, at that point, I need a license to it.
And just to add one point, what Mike said is exactly right. In the specific case of Power BI with embedding, Power BI supports an embedding mode where you can embed using a service account. Mm-hmm. So in that particular situation, you can embed and show content to users without having them have a Power BI license. However, generally speaking, at enterprise scale, that's not done. It's simply because people want to enforce security, and to have proper security, they then require that the embedding happens through the user's OAuth credentials. So while that's possible at scale, generally not used.
There's a question here about creating the portal pages and how that actually happens within the platform. So essentially, what's happening behind the scenes is that these are effectively web pages, right, in the platform. So, but it is a template type system. So you can create templates that lay out a page and the functionality behind a page, and then publish those templates to different groups within the organization so they can kind of fill in the gaps without having to do any coding. So today, the creation of those templates is done, it's HTML, JavaScript skill sets to create those templates, but to use those templates does not require any technical skills. So a template might be like that welcome page, where you can add different blocks to the page and set the links and images and the navigation behind them. I can create that template, publish it. You can create a page with a set of blocks on. I can create a page with a set of blocks on, that sort of thing. We are actually releasing a visual designer for that, right, Marius, that allows you to sort of, a front to sort of the web page builder that allows you to create a design without coding as much. So look out for that in a release or two, I guess. I'm not sure which one is slated for.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, those of you Metric Insights customers, we have a library of examples we can show and give you access to, and we're also we're happy to help with building out those templates. And as Mike said, once the template exists, then setting up what that template shows is very easy to do without any coding expertise, and it's all very, very easy. And therefore, it's easy to scale that out across the entire enterprise once it's been built.
Good. I think we've got through the questions. Thanks, Marius. Hopefully this has been interesting to everyone. We will be sharing the recording. It's probably available pretty soon on the BrightTalk instance. Obviously, if there's any further questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone.